Series on the upside down kingdom by reading from a passage from the book of Luke. Luke chapter 14, starting in verse 7. Please listen for the word of God. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, "Give this person your place." And then in disgrace you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Last week we said that part of learning to live in God's upside-down kingdom is learning to be honest with ourselves about the skewed values and the lies of our society, learning to tell it like it is to ourselves. Well, if you want to know someone who knew how to tell it like it is, I would like to introduce you to the 19th century Danish theologian and existential philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard one time said, "You know the reason that we keep time with watches and clocks instead of hourglasses? Because with watches we can perpetually delude ourselves, because the hands keep going round and round, making us think that time just goes on forever. If we used an hourglass, we would be forced every day to face the stark, harsh reality that for every single one of us, day by day, time is running out." Sweet, huh? Sorry to be so morbid on such a beautiful, sunny summer morning. But I guess what he's saying is that part of discovering the truth is learning to face up to it. He also said that the reason that we make so much noise on New Year's Eve and is, I quote, "because we are trying to drown out the macabre sound of grass growing over our own graves." Sounds like the kind of guy you want to invite to your next dinner party, doesn't it? Even though he lived over 200 years ago, he was already saying that it was the frantic, frenetic pace of our Western society, that the reason we were doing that was because we were trying to evade this encroaching, perpetual sense of our own death. Kierkegaard said, each one of us has a sickness unto death, and one of the greatest challenges of human life is to try to figure out what we're going to do about it. A little while later, a man named Ernst Becker, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author of the book Denial of Death, took this a little bit further. He said that, in fact, everything that we do in life is a unconscious or conscious or unconscious way of us trying to somehow evade or cheat or escape death. Trying to do things that are going to live on so that we don't have to really die, so that we can become immortal. He pointed out this frantic compulsion that we have to achieve success and to become and to grow and to accumulate things. He said that while we do that partially for our own safety and security in this world, that really the deep down reason we're doing this is we're trying to figure out a way not to die. He says we climb on the treadmill and we start running as fast as we can and as hard as we can to try to get in front of everybody so that we can be first, we can be number one. We start to accumulate stuff and prestige and accomplishments and victories. And as we grow, we try to build for ourselves our own kingdom so that we might leave a sturdy and indelible enough footprint in this world so that maybe we won't have to die after all. Or perhaps maybe we will live on after we've died. Now, of course, God says that it doesn't work this way. In fact, God says it's just the opposite of everything that we've learned and everything that we've heard, that the first shall be last and the last shall be first, that those who humble themselves will be exalted and those who exalt themselves will be humbled. If you want to be the greatest, first you need to become the servant of all. Now, those phrases aren't going to be showing up as motivational posters on the walls of that new Trump Tower in Chicago. You know the one I'm talking about, with those 4-story high glowing letters, T-R-U-M-P, emblazoned across the side of the building? But what Jesus says is that if we spend all our time trying to climb to the top of the ladder, we're going to find ourselves at the bottom of the things that actually count in this world, that can bring real satisfaction and true life contentment. That as we are frantically trying to get to the top, what we're really going to find is stress and fear and paranoia and exhaustion and disillusionment. I don't know if it's quite this bad here yet, but when we were living in New Jersey, we knew about moms who would go out and sign up their children for preschool the moment they learned they were pregnant. And that the preschools would allow it if you brought an ultrasound to prove that you were pregnant. And it was all because of this just frantic sense that they had to get their child into a good preschool, because that's the only way that they were going to be able to get into one of the top kindergartens in the city, so that they could make them into one of the top elementary schools and then junior highs and senior highs, so they could go one of the best colleges, so that they could get one of the best jobs, so that they could become a neurotic, overworked stress case like their parents. Because it had obviously worked out so well for them. And what makes things even worse is that we all know that when we finally do succeed and we achieve those things that we've been killing ourselves to try to get, the thrill never lasts. In fact, when we finally get that big promotion or the best car on the block or the bigger house, the thing that amazes us most isn't the enduring satisfaction and real contentment we get out of it. What amazes us most is how quickly the thrill wears off, right? And how quickly we're longing for the next thing. And the degree to which we are given this incredible fear of losing what we have. I mean, you know it. You've seen it at every level. There's more and more to lose. And so there's more and more fear of what happens if I lose all of this stuff that I've achieved. When Yvette and I first moved into the manse in New Jersey, at our church there, it was gigantic. Unbelievable. Oh, wait, that's the wrong picture. Wait a second. There it is. This gigantic house, bigger than anything we ever would have needed or wanted. We had enough furniture to fill up maybe half the rooms. There were rooms we never even walked into. But soon enough, right after we got there, we started going to estate sales, and we started buying things and accumulating things and spreading our stuff out around the house. It took us all about 3 months to realize we need a house this big. In fact, we started getting a little stressed out, wondering what we were going to do when the time came to leave Morristown, if we ever had to try to buy a house that big on our own. And so we thought, okay, well, maybe the day after Ryan is born, Yvette could go back and get her master's in nursing so that she could get a really high-paying job, preferably in Manhattan with that long, crazy commute, work lots of hours overtime, just so that we'd be able to keep up. Does it sound familiar? I've talked with so many of you who've said the pressures and the difficulty just to be able to live in an area like this. It's crazy. To be able to keep up with what you've achieved, the trying to keep things at the level that you've gotten to. I remember one of the most amazing things about our 16-month honeymoon backpacking around the world, when Yvette and I traveled all over the world. One of the most amazing things beyond the wonder of savoring all of the sights and the smells and the cultures and the language and the people was the perspective that it gave us on life and what is success and what the good life is, and really realizing the freedom, the incredible freedom, life-giving insight that everything I was ever going to need in life was standing right there beside me. And that all the stuff that I would need to live my life could honestly be fit in a little backpack that I was carrying on my back. That there were days that we could live on $3 a day, have a roof over our head and 3 square meals for $3 a day. And what's more, some of those $3 days were going to be the most beautiful, joyful, fulfilling days of our entire life. We see it over and over again. People who push and fight and struggle so hard, who forego their family and their health, let go of their friendships and their faith just to try to climb day after day, rung after rung, hand over hand up the ladder, to find out when they get to the top of it, after it's too late, that they've been climbing on the wrong ladder all along. James and John, I don't know if you remember, this scene where James and John come to Jesus and they say, Jesus, you got to promise us something. When you get into heaven, we need you to promise us that one of us is going to be at your right hand, the other one's going to be your left hand. They want these like special cabinet posts in heaven. And Jesus basically says, guys, you really don't get it. This is not the way it works. And he launches into this explanation. And here is what he says to them afterwards. Jesus called them together and said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. But not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Barbara Brown Taylor, in one of her sermons, tries to imagine what that conversation would sound like if Jesus went a little further, and here's what she says. The new world isn't like the old one. Turns out the old world turns the old world upside down. The number ones are not the powerful people having their pictures taken at the head of the table. They're the quiet ones, slipping in and out among the guests, refilling the wine glasses, laying down clean silverware for the next course. The great ones are not the dignitaries to the left and the right of the ruler. They are the slaves who are stirring pots in the kitchen, testing the temperature of the soup so that it's neither too hot nor too cold for the honored guests. James and John want Jesus to hurry up and become king of the world. But he has other things on his mind. Like, has everyone been served? Is all of the food on the table? Does anyone need anything? You know, there are people who get this, who realize that at some point in their life that true satisfaction, true joy, true contentment doesn't come through our success and our achievement, but by serving others and giving ourselves away and looking for the little things that we can do to make other people's lives easier. And when they do, it changes everything. They realize that they're playing for an audience of one. They're not out there trying to impress others. When I was in Westlake, we had this wonderful, humble, super sweet guy named Garrick Newman. And Garrick was one of the most considerate, thoughtful, service-oriented people you could ever imagine. And somewhere along the line, no one asked him to do this, but he just took it upon himself to start taking care of all of the gardens around WPC, Westminster Prez grounds, all of the buildings, all of the little rose gardens and all of that. And he would come at least once a week, often more than that, often a few times a week, and he would water and weed and clip and prune and keep everything looking absolutely beautiful. And the thing that was so amazing to me about that is at the very same time that he was doing this, he also happened to be the Secret Service agent in charge of all of Ronald Reagan's security. The guy in charge of the entire Secret Service detail for President Reagan while Reagan was in office. And so more times than I can count, I would be at home watching CNN at night, and there I would see Garrick, his face just a little bit blurred, standing right off of the left shoulder of President Reagan as Reagan was making some news conference in Moscow or Beijing. And the next morning, when I would arrive in the office at 8:30 in the morning, I would almost trip over Garrick. Down on his knees, covered in dirt, clipping some roses, pruning some things, weeding some things, when I would come in the morning. He took as seriously keeping those gardens beautiful as he did protecting the life of the President of the United States. What had happened is he didn't need anybody else to prop him up or to make him feel important because he knew that he was important to God. He did everything that he did with excellence because he was playing for an audience of one. And once you get into that frame mind, it changes everything. And suddenly all of the pressure and all of the need to build and accumulate and to make a name for yourself and to build a kingdom for yourself so that you don't have to die, it melts away. And you're not afraid to die anymore because you know that you're just a part. You're an important part, but you're just a part of a much bigger story. When I was doing singles ministry, we used to love taking our young adults and our singles to go and be coaches for the Special Olympics. And the thing I loved about it most is it gave us exposure to an entire community who lived relatively free from all of the twisted ways and priorities of our world. A group of people who are able to live without having to get caught up in the stifling, poisoning, terrible values and priorities of this society of ours. One time, the president of the Special Olympics was asked in a news conference what his favorite moment of the year was. And without hesitation, he talked about a particular race one day where 6 developmentally handicapped kids were going to race a 100-meter race. And now they had been practicing their entire year, and each one of them wanted to win this race more than anything. And they lined up along the starting line in a stadium filled with 50,000 fans. And the gun went off, and all 6 of them started running for all they were worth for the finish line 100 yards away. About halfway through the race, one of the runners tripped. And he went flying, full on, face first, spread eagle, out on the tarmac. Well, the other runners continued on for a few more steps, but then they stopped. All of them, every single one of them, stopped. And they looked back and they saw the fallen runner on the track. And then to the bewilderment and the shock of that entire stadium, all 5 of them walked back, helped the fallen runner up onto his feet. They all grabbed hands, and they all ran together, crossing the finish line at the exact same time. In our world, all 6 of them would have been fired. Thank God, in their world, on that day, in this upside-down kingdom, all 6 of them got gold medals. Now you tell me, which world is deluded? Amen. Do you all remember George Jetson? Do you remember that? Meet George Jetson. And then at the end, he's on the treadmill. Jane, get me off this crazy thing. Well, part of living in the upside-down kingdom is knowing when to step off of the treadmill, right? Knowing what actually makes life rich and real and content and joyful. We don't have a whole lot of time in this world. And there is no time for us to waste stuff on anything that doesn't matter. Part of getting off of the treadmill is understanding that we don't have to use our last minute and our last drop of energy and our last dollar building up artificial kingdoms for ourselves that are just going to crumble away when we die. In the process of time,